If there was one series I could confidently claim I've spent hundreds of hours on across each title, it would have to be Trails. Each entry of this rich franchise features countless character interactions that explore many related facets, creating the most immersive gaming world that I've ever seen. In the West, we're now close to the current releases in Japan, which is quite unbelievable. Following this series since the Sky Saga's localization, I never thought we'd progress this much, this quickly. This has finally led to the arrival of the highly anticipated Calvard arc in The Legend of Heroes: Trails Through Daybreak. After 4 games of Erebonia in the Cold Steel saga, as well as what essentially is a Crossbell 2.5 and Cold Steel 4.5 in Trails into Reverie, this arc's arrival is a welcome clean slate. While it obviously connects to the past and future of the games, having a new cast and a new setting is a refreshing change. I really dove into Trails Through Daybreak after spending over 120 hours on this intricately woven adventure. It's very clear that this is the most ambitious start to an arc in the franchise's history.
Van, are you in there? The floor's so chilly.
You've got to be kidding me.
Oh, you really are here.
The hell are you barging in on me for?
They told us at Monmar that you might be here right now, so we decided to join you for a soak.
Trails Through Daybreak occurs 1 year after the events of Trails into Reverie. For now, we've moved on from the likes of the SSS and Class 7, both new and old. Here in the Republic of Calvard, the economy is booming more than ever, thanks to post-war reparations from the War of Cold Steel 4, Operation Jormungandr. Still, not all walks of life are hunky-dory. The truth is perhaps most evident through the eyes of our protagonist, Van Arkwright. The self-appointed Spridgen regularly toes the line of legality, taking on jobs for individuals who can't turn to the police or Bracer Group for aid. He's morally gray, though this doesn't stop Arma student Agnes from making a request that significantly alters their lives forever. As a protagonist in her own right, Agnes is on the hunt for the Genesis, which are mysterious orbments tied to her family. After the first Genesis caused Vaughn to turn into an aberration known as the Grendel, he decides to help Agnes find all 8 pieces, likely making this the longest job he's ever taken on. Trails Through Daybreak is a breath of fresh air in every way you can imagine. The distinctions are immense, from the story pacing and tone to the party dynamics. The center of these changes stems from Vaughn, who, aside from Kevin, is the boldest protagonist in the series. Contrasting the well-meaning nature of Estelle, Lloyd, and Reen, Vaughn's occupation makes him jaded and more realistic. He isn't cold-hearted and cruel, he just explores solutions and conversations differently from the norm of this series. Given that he takes jobs from society's underworlds, even the antagonistic group Ouroboros, you can see why this stands out. At 24, which is a bit old for a JRPG protagonist, Vaughn's dynamics with the cast inherently stand out. Even after just 1 game, Vaughn is already my second favorite protagonist in this franchise. Aside from his compelling traits, the way he's approached is masterfully clever. You're not privy to sensitive information about Vaughn's life, even when it sometimes feels like you should know. Whenever a facet of his past comes up in conversation, it feels natural and readily expiatory for the player's sake. You're kept in the dark about certain aspects all the way to the end, making his enigmatic background constantly engrossing to ponder. More than any previous protagonist, it sometimes feels like you don't truly know who you're playing as, providing a pretty unique sensation. The character approach makes the rest of the main cast, especially Agnes, more engaging by extension. In some scenarios where you make a story choice, Vaughn will ask a party member a question he already knows the answer to, putting more noticeable distance between him and the player. The rest of the party isn't quite as strong, but I became impressively attached to just the start of this arc, surpassing my engagement with the Sky and Crossbell cast as a whole. Aside from Agnes, the party members are gradually introduced across each chapter, making the pacing the next topic. Trails Through Daybreak can be seen as a melding of every previous saga in terms of its progression. You have a hub in Calvard's capital, Edith, akin to Crossbell and Cold Steel. At the same time, you visit new areas and greet new characters as party members for most chapters, which is somewhat akin to the Sky Saga. Above all else, you'll become most well acquainted with Edith, as you spend tons of time here before embarking on chapter-specific trips. Like most every previous entry, Daybreak is full of side quests and NPC dialogue, with recurring characters who have many storylines and arcs of their own if you pay attention to them. These NPC storylines do fantastic job showcasing Zemuria and Calvard's culture in financial climates, with examples like the introduction of idols, the success of films in the entertainment landscape, and cars becoming increasingly popular. I wasn't expecting Daybreak to have much NPC dialogue to begin with since, unlike the previous arcs, you can't talk to every NPC on the map. Instead, you can only interact with those with chat icons. However, plenty of dialogue is here to peruse, much more than the average player will read through though. If you do so, you'll become far more invested in the region. While not on the level of Cold Still's NPCs, Daybreak is near the height of that raised bar. I spoke to every single NPC throughout the game, meaning I've seen every bit of dialogue sans party-specific circumstances depending on who you have with you. I can comfortably claim that the editing job here is pretty excellent. This is NISA's strongest localization to date, with no standout grammatical or spelling oversights I can recall, even with the most minor NPCs. There's only a couple typos that come to mind that won't impede the experience for even the most hardcore fans, but if I had to nitpick, it's the characters use still as a sentence opener far too frequently. Another topic worth discussing is whether Daybreak is truly as newcomer friendly as advertised. The truth is that it's less than you'd expect. While you can certainly begin here and follow the general plot, the reliance on knowing the previous games becomes pretty evident the further you progress. Then again, this is likely one of the last recommendable entry points the series will have, so if this one really calls out to you, give it a shot. Circling back to the writing, Daybreak excels with its main cast and dynamics, with everyone naturally fitting into the group. Admittedly, Judith and Brigard feel shafted by comparison, but they too receive significant moments. The supporting cast, comprised of a few different individuals, also shine with no weak link. However, the villains are where I have the most issues. While each has a tremendous presence, they end up falling into the tired Falcom practice of being comically evil with flimsy justifications that arrive too late to leave an emotional impact. Only one doesn't feel this generalized, as she stood out positively. I found one other member constantly entertaining thanks to the fantastic English dub performance. Speaking of, the English dub of Daybreak is terrific. Continuing the quality from the Cold Still saga, Damian Haas and Emma Lee feel like ideal casting for Vaughn and Agnes, respectively. I can't praise their performance enough. Everyone was great, though I actually didn't like the casting choice for the returning character, Zin. Patrick Sees did not reprise his role from the combat lines throughout Sky, which was kinda jarring since Keith Silverstein returned as a certain other character from Sky. Unfortunately, Zin's English dub was the only one that I didn't find that fit. Finally, let's get to gameplay. Daybreak is in an all-new ballpark with plenty of ambition evident right from the outset. This is the first full game with Falcom's new in-house engine, which has several improvements, such as the seamlessness of exploration. Entering interiors no longer requires a loading screen, which may seem minor, but it is a massive step up from the developer's previous releases. The character models are also generally smoother and more impressive, so the move here was the right decision. Combat is another area of vast differences that are genuinely intimidating. The ornament system has seen a fundamental revamp, making the most significant shifts since the start of Cold Steel over a decade ago. The sole similarity that comes to mind in application is hollow cores, which serve the same function as master quartz. To simplify these matters, the new ornament system brings back the importance of Cephas values from the pre-Cold Steel series, with every character having element-specific slots as you'd expect. However, the new improvements are birthed from these Cephas values, with each line of the character's ornament, be it attack, defense, magic, or extra, having specific abilities, shared skills that are unlocked depending on the elemental distribution throughout the specific line. For example, let's say a character attack line has the ability to instill physical strikes with the element of fire. Acquiring this ability requires you to implement quartz with the necessary amount of fire Cephas into the line, like attack. It's an admittedly overwhelming practice that becomes parsable the more you experiment, and it's full of fascinating ideas. Bonuses like viewing treasure chests, locations on the map can even be learned, taking the practice of detection quartz. As someone who loves the ornament system from Sky and Crossbell, I quickly found this new iteration to be my cup of tea. Specialized character builds are more than rewarding than ever before. Also, like the previous games, you must unlock each character's ornament slots with Cephas to slot in quartz. I found this process to be an improvement over the later Cold Steel titles, since you need massive amounts of Cephas to unlock later slots, so you'll be doing so for almost the entire game. As a result, unlocking an ornament slot feels like a major event, making the character growth significantly rewarding. However, it's worth noting that the ornament line abilities only have a percentage of activation, which relates to another new feature, the SP gauge.
Let's finish the job.
This'll do the trick.
You got this.
Locking up. You're next.
I'll dice you up. All you on, yes.
Make it count.
Going all in.
Activating skill.
Keep going.
During turn-based combat, you can activate an SP boost, communicated by glowing bars on the UI's bottom left that fill the more you attack and take damage. SP boosting increases the likelihood of ornament abilities activating, and they're also required for S-crafts, which are powerful character-specific techniques that unleash boatloads of damage or recover health. Interestingly, the number of SP gauges per battle increases the more times you boost, so you can really go to town on enemies if you stock up. This design choice also prevents multiple characters from spamming SP crafts at the start of battles, since 2 bars are required for activations. That said, I'm getting a tad bit ahead of myself. The most identifiable difference with Daybreak's gameplay is how you can shift between turn-based and real-time action combat on the fly. The latter features every playable character having their own simple combos and single special attacks. While doing action combat, you can either defeat your enemies in that circumstance or enter the command turn-based battles. Performing this feat is ideal when you break an enemy on the field by feeling their stun gauge. The entire process is seamless, with an explorable environment identical to the combat scenario. The turn-based battles will be abundantly familiar to veteran fans, with magic spells known as arts and character-specific skills known as crafts being at the heart of each encounter. However, positioning is more important than ever before, with some crafts benefiting from where you're standing in relation to a targeted enemy, providing light yet appreciated strategy. You also have to consider enemy elemental weaknesses and buffs as you do with your typical RPG. Before moving on, it's worth emphasizing that arts have seen structural changes. Here, they're no longer tied to quartz. Instead, they're tied to new equipable items called arts drivers, which can be pre-equipped with the assortment of arts themed around specific builds, such as elemental specific or healing ones. Still, depending on which art drivers you're working with, they have a number of free slots that you can equip plugins into, and these are solo arts that are not affixed to a driver. These new art features took some getting used to, since they are entirely different from what this franchise has done previously. I don't believe this idea was embraced to its fullest extent, since you rarely need to rely on attack arts, but buffs are integral. Regardless, it's an excellent foundation to build on that can further enhance character specializations in future entries. During command battles, the Argus links of Cold Steel have returned under the new name of Sklim, so there's some familiarity there. Plus, the audio and visual design of the attacks themselves, both in command and action, are delightful, so encounters are always satisfying. However, Daybreak is undeniably the easiest game in the franchise. While the series has never been known for its difficulty, since you can break apart their balancing at the seams, Daybreak's lack of challenges feels a little greater. Unlike in previous titles, where you had to do some setup to break the balance, Daybreak is inherently easy, even on the hardest difficulty, Nightmare, which is how I played it. I was initially ready to criticize Daybreak for this flaw. Since I was playing on Nightmare, I should expect a challenge, but Daybreak isn't much of a step down in this avenue when considering the series' past. It'd be another matter altogether if the combat was simply unfun. However, since it's enjoyable thanks to solid audio design and visual impact, the lack of difficulty never actively feels like a detriment throughout my experience.
This'll hurt!
Activating skill.
Here I go! A chance! Activating drive! Thank you! Engaging shield!
Bring it on.
Full boost! Go all out! Keep it up! It's working! Time to go all out! Activating drive!
Have some more. There.
There were at least a handful of boss battles, chiefly in Chapter 3, the final optional virtual simulator encounter, and near the endgame that required actual strategy. You do need to take your equipment and field positioning into account, especially during boss battles, since those are only command-based. I would not describe Daybreak's difficulty as non-existent or mindless. You merely have to stay up to date with your builds and formations. It just never gets overly demanding. So to sum it all up, the combat and customization system of Daybreak are addictive and fulfilling throughout their entire duration, but the difficulty should have been retooled to make these mechanics more necessary to alter creatively as you progress. The action and turn-based systems have have separate difficulty toggles, with the former only going up to hard and the latter extending to nightmare. This allows you to progress throughout dungeons with the far simpler action system. A potential fix could be to prevent enemies from dying during field combat and surviving only once a portion of their health was depleted. This design choice would have magnified the importance of a turn-based system and stopped players from cheesing through standard enemy encounters. Still, if you're keeping up with this series, I doubt you're playing them expecting a hardcore challenge or elaborate dungeon design. These titles don't ever really need those facets to thrive. Turbo mode is worth mentioning too, as a returning feature from the past entry. This can be turned on at all times, even during the action combat. Another major feature of Daybreak is the LGC alignment system, but this is the only new feature that I found a significant issue with. But let's dive into what it is first. Throughout the game, Vaughn will sometimes have to make choices that determine the outcome of usually unimportant characters. These choices provide points across 3 moral alignment spectrums: law, gray, and chaos. At points, these values are also gained automatically. As for what these values actually do, reaching certain thresholds impacts Vaughn's morality, influencing a certain choice in one of the game's later chapters. These moral alignments also impact other later scenes. The LGC alignment is utterly captivating by concept alone, since it provides player choice in a clever way and emphasizes Vaughn's grayness with the world. So, regardless of which you side with, it fits his characterization. However, the actual consequences of these choices are merely slight divergences that either lead back to a common ground or lead to effects that don't matter to the story or cast at large. The player agency it provides is superficial at best. LGC is an overly ambitious concept that should probably have been dropped entirely or left on the drawing board for a while longer. Its implementation could have been improved somewhat by that aforementioned choice in one of the later chapters being more strict. To elaborate, Law, Gray, and Chaos all have 5 levels, and that choice in the late game opens options that are only possible if an alignment has been reached after level 3. This issue though is that sans Chaos, you will most definitely reach level 3 alignment levels for Law and Gray since you gain these attributes so frequently. The only other notable benefit to the LGC alignment levels is that special monsters appear in the final dungeon if the alignments are maxed, dropping materials for ultimate weapons once defeated. Daybreak also has a revamped food system that draws inspirations from the Sky Saga due to the sheer number of meals you can acquire. Each food item you find or cook grants gourmet points, with the amount depending on the dish. Then each level acquired in the gourmet point systems gives collective stat boosts to the entire party. It seems overly straightforward, but it cleverly encourages you to check out every shop and engage with cooking, a mechanic that many players might overlook. Granted, cooking has been simplified this time, with each dish only having one possible cook and no variations. This may seem to be going overboard, but when considering how many food and drink items there are, the deletion of variations was probably for the best. Speaking of simplification, Daybreak has wholly removed the character notes, books, and enemy scanning mechanics seen in previous entries. There are also no minigames either, including fishing. These design decisions make completion far more intimidating at the cost of almost too much leniency. It's not like any of these concepts are integral to Trail's identity or anything, but it is unfortunate how they're absent altogether. So let's get back to the characters. Vaughn has access to Connect events on free days, akin to bonding episodes seen throughout the Cold Steel saga. He gets to interact with the main party members and several acquaintances. Most of these scenarios are terrific supplemental deep dives into Vaughn's one-on-one dynamics with particular individuals, as well as occasional teases for the future. Then, these scenes fill out character respective affinity gauges that grant rewards once filled. Purchasable gifts in towns also contribute to the eventual completion of these gauges, giving another reason, like cooking, to pursue vendors as frequently as possible. Okay, one final thing to discuss, albeit briefly, is the soundtrack. Personally, I believe there's somewhat of a drop-off in Falcom's music quality post Cold Steel 2, but don't get me wrong, I'm in love with these soundtracks, but there seems to be a lack of identity with these later entry songs. Daybreak has some great tracks though, with Rise of the Grendel perhaps being the most loopable song Falcom has ever produced. Starting a new saga after 4 games of one and a reuniting follow-up is no meager feat, and Falcom accomplished it with flying colors. The Legend of Heroes Trails Through Daybreak excels with a brand new original cast, meaningful cameos, a gripping narrative, and inventive gameplay systems to set itself apart from the series' past. Unfortunately, the lack of difficulty can feel excessive, and the clever LGC alignment system is probably too ambitious for its own good to pay off effectively. Regardless, these issues can be mitigated in later entries. As it currently stands, fans, new and old, will undoubtedly find Daybreak to be a fresh shakeup in almost every conceivable way, making this yet another modern classic under Falcom's storied catalog. Noisy Pixel is giving The Legend of Heroes Trails Through Daybreak an 8.5 out of 10. Thanks for watching. This video is brought to you by our supporters on Patreon. Noisy Pixel is run by a group of gamers providing independent gaming coverage through news, reviews, previews, and more. Check out our Patreon to help support our continued growth and subscribe to keep up with all our future content.
Noisy Pixel.